Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Recently, one of the channels that I like to watch a lot, UFOB, one of the YouTube channels I like to look at, posted a little snippet, a little video about a case that happened in 1999 regarding a UFO taken off with an elk somehow, and there were 14 witnesses to this event. It happened on February 25th, 1999, just before noon and basically in broad daylight, before 14 forestry employees. And in addition to a little video that UFOB had posted, he also has a UFOB Reddit subreddit, and he has more information there. And it was a very interesting story. Basically, he gathered some information from the Mutual UFO Network and also the National UFO Reporting Center. They were basically the two groups that looked into this event when it happened. And I want to talk about this because, this to me, this sounds like what probably happened or what was going to happen or maybe did happen in 1994 during a fishing trip when I experienced the UFO along with a buddy of mine. And I'll get into, I've talked about that a number of times. I'm sure a lot of my listeners out there are very sick of hearing about it, but I always like talking about it. I can't help it. It's just one of those things, But anyway, I'm going to go through some of the details of this 1999 incident that happened in Washington State, and then compare it to what happened in 1994 during that fishing trip that I was on, where I saw a UFO up close and personal. Anyway, according to this information that was gathered by UFOB, and I will leave links to everything to his he has on his YouTube channel. He actually has an audio report that you could listen to, and from when the incident happened, and also here he has all the reports that were filed by MUFON back in 1999 after this investigation. Anyway, here's what it says. It says the sighting time was before noon. It was a daytime sighting. It happened in the Cascade Mountains near Mount St. Helens, Washington. It was a metallic or whitish object which was seen in the day. And here's what it says here, summary. A team of forestry workers allegedly had been witness to an incident on Thursday, February 25th, 1999, during which time an elk was lifted off the ground and carried away by a very peculiar disc-shaped object. And then it says, on Monday, March 1st, 1999, the National UFO Reporting Center received a call over its telephone hotline from an individual who identified himself as an employee in the forestry industry in Washington State. The individual left a message in which he reported that a team of forestry workers allegedly had been witness to an incident on Thursday, February 25th, 1999, during which time an elk was lifted off the ground and carried away by a very peculiar disc-shaped object. Peter Davenport, director of NUFORC, contacted several of the individuals whose names and telephone numbers had been provided by the first contact. Based on those telephone conversations, he elected to initiate a preliminary investigation of the incident. Because NUFORC traditionally does not serve as an investigative body, Mr. Davenport contacted Mr. Robert A. Fairfax, Director of Investigations for the Washington State chapter of the Mutual UFO Network, which does conduct investigations of alleged UFO sightings. Mr. Davenport and Fairfax traveled to the location of the alleged incident and jointly have been conducting an investigation of this elk abduction case since Friday, March 5th. Their investigation to date has included a trip to the site of the incident, an interview of 3 of the alleged 14 witnesses to the actual abduction, and several conversations with individuals who work with the eyewitnesses. In addition, the investigators inspected the carcass of an adult elk, a pregnant cow, which was found dead beside a logging road on March 1st by other forestry employees within a few miles of the principal event. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So they saw this elk getting carried away, and then later on, these investigators found the carcass of an elk and also a pregnant cow on a logging road nearby. And what does that tell you? Obviously, both of them were probably mutilated. And then here was another little article here. It says, on this winter morning, 14 forestry workers, employees of a large unnamed company, were planting trees in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, about 20 miles west of Mount St. Helens. 3 of the men had been watching a nearby herd of elk in the valley below them all morning. Suddenly, a heel-shaped object with 2 stripes on its back appeared over a nearby ridge and began drifting in a northeast direction. Initially, the 3 men thought it was something like a parachute, but it maintained a steady altitude, following the contours of the terrain below it. As the object began to move toward the herd of elk, the 3 men called out to the other 11 members of the work crew. All 14 men stood on the hillside and watched as the object floated down into the valley towards the elk. The silent object was able to get quite near the elk before the animals noticed it. When they did notice it, most of the herd ran to the east, toward a densely wooded area. One elk, though, trotted off toward the north down a logging road. It was to this lone elk that the object flew. The amazed workers watched as the object floated above the elk and then appeared to lift the elk off the ground with some sort of invisible force. The object then moved off, with the elk slowly rotating beneath it. It moved up the ridge, barely clearing the trees, and then down into the next valley out of sight of the forestry workers. After a few minutes, the object then reappeared, apparently without the elk, and rose at high speed until it disappeared into the sky. Now there's some more here, but there's really, you could check out the rest of this article for yourself, but you get the idea. So basically, 14 witnesses on this event that happened in 1999 saw this weird-looking object come floating out of nowhere and actually carry off an elk with some invisible force, and then the elk was gone, and then the object took off. It's an amazing story. And you have 14. They interviewed, as far as this story is concerned, they interviewed 3 of them, 3 of the witnesses, and apparently they all confirmed this. And why would anybody want to make something like this up? And you just really can't. It doesn't really make any sense. But what's interesting when I saw this story, because this is the first time I heard of this story. I never came across this one before. There's a lot of different things I want to talk about. Apparently, and then later on, the 2 investigators found, an elk alongside of a dead pregnant cow. So I'm assuming, these beings, did what they do. They mutilated the cow, they mutilated the deer. We don't really know. We talk about cattle mutilations. The only reason that we know of all the thousands of cattle mutilations is because, there's people who own the cattle who notice that they're dead or missing, and that's what happens. So, how many deer and how many other animals are these objects going after? I mean, if it wasn't for these forestry employees standing on a hill looking down into this valley that day, then, we wouldn't know about this. But, they all witnessed it. Some silent object comes floating in, some weird object. Now, the one thing that it states here is that the object was basically 8 feet. It was described as being 8 feet. That seems pretty small to me. According to this, it says the size of objects 7 to 8 feet. That was a lot smaller than the object that I saw in 1999, and I'm going to get in, or excuse me, 1994. The object that I saw in 1994, of course, it was in August 1994. And it was, I went fishing with a buddy at it was actually a private community, next to a private lake, and we were actually fishing in a pond off the lake, and we were there we got there like around 5:30, somewhere around that time. It was just starting to, it was starting to get, dark. It was dusk or something, and we fished for hours. We fished, and then it was pitch black, and it was around 10 o'clock at night. I've told this story a number of times, and we were fishing at this pond. We weren't catching anything, and we were on the shore, but we didn't have a boat or anything like that. and we were fishing on the shore of this pond, and I was sitting down, and I turned around to get something out of the tackle box, and behind me was like an open field, and on the edge of the field was a forest, and I saw these 3 giant lights lined up horizontally, floating behind some trees, like moving behind the trees, and then it came out from behind the trees and started moving toward our position. And I said to my buddy, I said, hey, what the hell's that? And then he said, I don't know. And then the thing came floating right up to where we were, right? It basically stopped in midair, just stopped there, only 2.5 stories off the ground. This thing was big. It was, in my mind, it was like a giant ranch house just floating there, 2.5 stories off the ground. No noise whatsoever, 3 giant lights on it. And my buddy's shining a flashlight on the bottom of it. And then that's when I said, let's get the hell out of there. And we start throwing all the fishing stuff in the back of his pickup truck. And meanwhile, then the things start moving away in a different direction over the trees. And so as we're driving away, the thing's still moving away. And then we had to get on this dirt road, and we're driving along this dirt road, and we had to stop because there was at least 20 deer running across the dirt road away from the area where that thing had just flown. So I think that my impression of this, what happened at that time, was that those deers were completely spooked by this object, and that's what they're running away from. They weren't, that's what it was. That's what I had the feeling that night, that they were running in complete, absolute fear. In fact, I live, most of my life in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of deer. I've seen lots of deer crossing roads, and that was the only time I ever saw that many deer crossing a road. I've seen 7, 8, 9, but I never saw 20 or more. I think it was actually more than 20. I mean, we were sitting there for a little bit watching these deer just panicking, running across the road away from the direction from where that thing flew. So I wonder now, after reading this story, is that what happened that night? Was that thing looking for a deer? There's, I used to always, I have a lot of different theories. I really don't know what it was doing. I don't know what, we were in the middle of nowhere, we were at a pond fishing. What I used to think, well, maybe that object was coming to that pond to take on water. I've heard stories. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people out there interested in UFOs that are listening or watching listening to this podcast right now have heard stories where these objects are seen floating over a body of water and taking on water. I always thought that maybe that's what it was going to do, but then it saw, me and my buddy there fishing, and then it, decided to go away. But I also thought that maybe it was there to, take a deer off, That was one of the other theories I had. I don't know. I do know that we weren't abducted. There was no lost time that night, because I know I actually was aware of that possibility at that time before that event happened, because I did know something about UFOs, before that event. And I've seen some I had seen some documentaries on television, so I was aware of that. And I remember checking my watch not long before that incident happened, and then after we got out of there, there was no lost time, so I don't think we were abducted. So what was it there for? I used to think it was water, but it could have been to pick up one of these deer. I mean, again, we were in pretty much in the middle of nowhere at this place. It was a place called Beach Mountain Lakes. And it's a private community near Hazleton, Pennsylvania, it's a gate. You have to, the reason we were able to get in there because my buddy's mom knew somebody and that lived there, and he asked her friend to get permission so he can go fishing in there. He wanted to go fishing not at the lake, but at this pond. He wanted to try this pond. And then he called me up that day, and that's how I ended up, he said, you want to go fishing with me tonight? I was like, yeah, okay. That's how we ended up there. And believe me, this place there was nobody around. There was, no houses were nearby or anything like that. I mean, so what was this object doing there? I think, after reading this, I think most likely now that thing was there that night to take a deer, and for all I know, maybe it got one. But the object that we saw that night, it was a lot bigger than 7 or 8 feet. I mean, I'm assuming what they're saying here, it's 7 or 8 feet in diameter. The distance that these guys who saw it was 800 yards. I mean, then again, when you're standing far away from an object, it could seem smaller than what it really is. But then again, they probably would have had an idea once it lifted up the elk compared to what the object size was, and that's maybe how they determined it was 7 to 8 feet in diameter. The thing that I saw that night, that had to be at least 30 feet in diameter, because the spacing of the lights, it was had to be pretty big. And I know that it was saucer shaped. I couldn't tell that, but my buddy, because the object pretty much stopped right in front of me and then started moving away. The lights were always in front of me, but he was off on the side of it, shining the flashlight up on it. He saw it, and it was saucer shaped. And then the object, actually, another thing that it did, it was floating very close to the trees, the one that we saw that night. But I wonder if it's all part of the same alphabet soup. Do these are they manned with occupants? Are there alien occupants in these things when they're taking up the animals to mutilate them? Or are they probes? Remotely operated. Who knows? Automatic probes. I mean, who knows how they operate? It's all conjecture and speculation. We really don't know. But I think that this incident, is probably similar to the incident that I had in 1994. Who knows if they got a deer in 1994? I don't know. We didn't see that. But there were a lot of deer there, so it could have been. And, another thing about all of this is the fact that, again, this proves to me, they're out there looking for blood. I mean, that's what's going on here. They're just like us, I guess, where they're looking for animals. I mean, they're draining these animals of blood, not just cattle, but deer and other animals. I mean, there's been many different animals that have been found in the same kind of condition of cattle that have been mutilated. It's, if you read the literature on this, you'll discover that there's a lot of cases like that, and you wonder, okay, now usually in cattle mutilations, for instance, there's always like certain parts of the body that are cut off, okay, like or missing, like part of the jaw area is gone, carved out, part one of the ears is carved out, the eye, an eye or two are gouged out, the anus is cored out, udders are and it's all done with like laser precision. The tongues of these animals are cut out, with like laser precision, and you wonder what's the reason for that, and then all the blood's drained on top of it. So I know here's what it could be. I mean, maybe removing those things makes it easier to take the blood out of these things. Removing those parts of the body, of these animals makes it easier to remove the blood. It's almost like, when you have a can, in the old days you had, the way a can of soda or a can of beer was, you had to get a can opener and you'd open one side to drink from and another side so it would flow better. So you'd have two holes in it. Maybe that's that's the reason. I mean, who knows? Or maybe it's so they can tell if there's no blood coming out of where the tongue is cut off, then they know they're finished. Then, the process is done, and then they could just drop the carcass and take off. Who knows? It's all guesswork. It's all speculation. We don't know. Again, I'm just guessing. But it is interesting, and I do believe this case is very similar to, what I experienced in probably the same kind of scenario. I would imagine, I wouldn't doubt, put it this way, I would say probably 75% now. After reading this story, I believe there's a 75% chance that that thing there that night was looking to pick up a deer, and it came to I'm just, again, pure speculation. It sensed some life forms near the pond, and we were standing basically out in the wide open, and it would have been easier, right? And then to pick us up, but then it saw that we were human beings, and it floated away looking for looking for a deer instead of a human being. Again, I don't know. All I know is that it happened and it was real, and there are things here doing things, and we don't know all the reasons why, but hopefully it becomes clear soon. Hopefully we have some answers pretty soon.